Lumkile Mondi, Senior Lecturer at the Wits School of Economics and Business Science, joins us for a chat on some of the economic recovery plans that we can also expect. Now, Mr. Mondi, of course, we are going to be looking at some of the economic recovery plans. We're looking at the response to the G7 summit's talk today. The pandemic, global recovery is a big talking point. What do you think President Ramaphosa as an invited guest can do to boost investor confidence after SAA and Eskom announcements just before he left?
Firstly, I think it's quite important for us to understand that the global economy can only recover sustainably if every nation in the world is vaccinated against COVID-19. So therefore, I think President Ramaphosa and President Modi's link remotely is trying to really make sure that the support from the Americans does become unanimous, and we get many of the developing world having the ability or allowed to tap into the technology to produce the vaccine. Of course, many countries don't have the manufacturing base, so only a few countries will benefit, but at least there'll be more countries producing, and therefore we should be able to really produce quicker and distribute, and hopefully by the end of 2022 we'll have at least vaccinated many people and many economies will be open, and therefore we can talk about a sustainable economic recovery, which at the moment seems too far, despite the fact that South Africa grew by 1.1 in the first quarter, a very positive sign indeed, given what had seen in the period last year as well as in the period around 2019, where in fact, even though there was no COVID, but South Africa struggled in terms of economic growth.
We're looking at the G7 objective. We've seen the effects of COVID-19 and also discussions surrounding economic recovery. What are some of the interventions that you could perhaps outline for President Cyril Ramaphosa that he will always likely to propose, particularly during those all-important bilateral talks?
He's running for support, I think, particularly for developing and emerging markets. We've seen that with the lockdown across the world, particularly commodity exporting countries who have relied on exports have continued to export, but there was a period where, because of a lack of economic activity, particularly in Europe as well as America, those exports were not doing very, very well. So he's really drumming for African reinvestment. Of course, he's doing so at the back of a very positive move by Africa through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And there's immense opportunities for foreign direct investment, particularly in infrastructure, from rail, roads, electricity, as well as water, including agriculture. So I think he's wearing an African hat, of course, with South Africa at the top of that hat, given that South Africa is one of the largest economies in Africa and is facing huge challenges around infrastructure and with very weak balance sheet. And therefore, although he's really mobilizing an African effort, I think at the back of his mind is also to ensure that South Africa does also get the support that it requires for it to deal with high levels of unemployment of about 32.5%, and really with youth being hit very heavily as it continues to remain outside the labor market and creating in the long term instability in South Africa, given our inability to create jobs.
Mr. Mondi, you've spoken about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, an entire subject on its own. I'm just looking at the high unemployment rates you've also alluded to. Imperative that the creation of jobs and stats need to be maintained, of course, on the back of the stats released just last week. Looking at President Cyril Ramaphosa's tenure, how is he faring, in your opinion?
I mean, he's got a very mixed record. Remember, what he's done very, very well so far is ensuring that at least there is some political stability. We have seen that within his own party, he's dealt decisively with any suspicions relating to people who were involved in malfeasance and corruption. We've seen that, for example, the general secretary of the ANC is a step aside, waiting for the due process to take its course. Similarly, he took action against his Minister of Health, who also has been implicated. And therefore, I think politically, he seems to be consolidating power within the ANC, and therefore that should allow him to govern better. And in doing so, we've seen also he's brought into South Africa what the Mbeki Mandela regime could not do, privatization. Specifically, meaning that in the energy generation, we're going to see self-generators, what he calls embedded generation taking place, but also a number of new players who will be generating. And doing so, in fact, not only does he lessen our dependence on Eskom, but also impact on our transition, because a number of the private sector investment will be using new technologies, whether it's battery storage, it's wind, solar, as well as many other technologies, including hydrogen, which is now becoming a very strategic industrial play in the near future, with huge job opportunities, but also allowing South Africa to transition away from fossil fuels. Also, South African Airways as well mustn't forget. However, with SAA, where his team has made a mistake is around a transparent and a due process, where we've seen that a B player has come in, and one wonders how did that happen, given that any disposal of state asset has to be an open process, particularly in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. We need to ensure that all South Africans have access to bid. This one has been strange. So I would think that many of the foreign investors or his partners in the G7 will listen, but will act very little, because they need to see more being done on corruption, on transparency and accountability. I think the president is trying, but it's not enough. We need to see more accountability, even with SAA for example. We need more explanation as to why this consortium was chosen and why is the price not known. If that's the case, why didn't they allow a public competitive bid, so that at least South Africa at large can get a much better offer and get to know who are the players who are bidding and how they were awarded that responsibility to resuscitate SAA.
Well, there were definitely, certainly a lot of important announcements made just before the president, of course, jetted off to the G7 summit, which you'll obviously have to face as well. I just want to conclude the conversation by looking at some of the domestic issues currently underway and how this is ultimately able to affect his visit. Is it going to affect his visit? Walk us through that.
I think, he's scoring a lot of points. I think he left really on a positive, but not around the Eskom issue. Yep. However, I'm on a countdown. So we have about 58 days left for NERSA, that's the electricity regulator of South Africa, as well as the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy, to come up with the law and regulation and licensing. That is the rules of the game, so that people can play the game. So that process has got now 58 days left. So I'm counting every day, and I'm hoping that they can beat that 60 days that the president announced, so that we can get generation players coming in, so that in 18 to 2 years' time, we can at least get another 5,000 megawatts onto the grid. And over time, then sell South Africa much better, because there's a security of energy of supply. But we need more than energy. We need rail, we need telecoms, we also need roads, reforms, including water for that matter, given that many municipalities are collapsing because of water. So he has to do more. I think energy is the first test, but we want to see him when he comes back talking more about the spectrum, about the railways, and as well as water and other areas which require serious reforms for us to move forward.
As the focus on the president as he's delivering his message and, of course, announcing his economic recovery plans. We'll continue to monitor that. Very warm thank you to Lumkile Mondi for joining us, senior lecturer at the Wits School of Economics and Business Science, chatting to us.